This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Well, it's been a week. I still don't think I fully recovered from WrestleMania weekend. That was a really long show we did. I'm surprised I had the endurance to go that long. I mean, this one's going to seem like a cakewalk in comparison, now that we're back to normally scheduled formatting. I don't want to prolong the intros here because I still have a bunch of stuff I need to do today. So we're going to get things rolling with this week's Friday show. This is the Five Starr Wrestling Report for all you new faces. Mondays and Fridays we're here, spreading the good word of classic and sometimes modern wrestling, wherever we can find it. I still haven't decided whether or not I'm going to watch SmackDown over the weekend. And that show is honestly just a law of diminishing return at this point. And after last week's marathon, I don't know if I can honestly stomach more modern wrestling right now without either falling asleep or just getting outright pissed off. So frustrating. AEW is in the news cycle again. Spoiler, it's not good. You know, while WWE is making money hand over fist, AEW is spending their Wednesday night programs taking underhanded pot shots and getting over an employee that now works for the competition. So that's where AEW is right now. Still don't regret my choice of giving up on that godforsaken company. I think I saw everything there is to see based on that hidden cam footage. I still have a million unanswered questions from all that. But the ironic part is I honestly don't even care at this point. I'm just fed up with all of it. So we'll stick to classic wrestling. At least that stuff is mildly interesting. So as I scramble to try to cram in watching the show over the weekend, shortly before night one of WrestleMania, in fact, I was trying to be cognizant of the time. I did not take meticulous notes about this week's syndicated program, so you'll have to pardon my lack of in-depth analysis on this week's show. I did my best, given the time constraints, but, well, we're still dealing with the fallout from the Clash event, kind of switching gears and moving to the upcoming Crockett Cup Tournament. Last week's show was very story-heavy on the angle they shot on the Superstation with Dusty, Magnum, Tully, and Jim Crockett. They had spent all of last week having the babyfaces and heels share their 2 cents on what ought to be done, given Dusty putting his hands on Jim Crockett Jr. during that little scuffle. And this week they inform us that a decision has been made. And Tony Schiavone met with the NWA headquarters to get the scoop. So a lot of that story bled over into this week. And much like how they opened last week with a fantastic squash, well, they did the same here. And instead of giving us the D-level job, guys, they went even deeper into the rabbit hole and found a good pair of F-status job guys. It is Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers versus Art Pritz and Big Bear Khali. The rib now with the Fantastics is How can we serve up a progressively worse set of job guys each week? Well, they gave him Art Pritz for starters. And Big Bear Collie wasn't much better himself. Yet again, we had Big Bear going into business for himself. Now that he finally got that name change, he decided early on, I'm going to no-sell Bobby Fulton's shoulder tackle attempt. And Bobby was not having any of Collie's bullshit. Now, he made sure Collie cooperated with his offense. There was a very long headlock sequence with Pritz and Fulton where you could tell Pritz had no idea what spot Fulton was trying to call. They somewhat did what they were intended to do, but it did not look fluid because it was Art Pritz feeding. Overall, my notes read, the Fantastics won with the rocket launcher in a match that easily went 5 minutes longer than it needed to be. It'd be one thing if they were wrestling a credible set of underneath guys like a Mike Jackson or a Nelson Royal, for example. When your opponents are Big Bear Collie and Art fucking Pritz. Why did this need to go 6 minutes? I don't know. But it set up their post-match interview, kind of like last week. You know, JR's recounting the Clash angle with Cornette whipping Fulton with the leather belt. It was almost a direct copy and paste promo from what they did last week. They love the fans. They appreciate the support. And they're going to take it to the Midnights and Jim Cornette next time they get in the ring. Also, get well soon, Papa Rogers. Very simple. Very modest. Not really much else to say about it. Nor was there much to say about the next TV match. Larry Zbyszko and Al Perez versus Ricky Santana and Tommy Angel. As we learned last week, for reasons that I still cannot explain, it was decided that Zbyszko and Perez were going to be partners in the '88 Crockett Cup. Apparently because they realized they needed 24 teams to fill the seeds. They only really had like maybe 5 functioning tag teams on a week-by-week basis. So now like 70% of the tournament is makeshift pairings. If you're not doing anything important right now, you're working the Crockett Cup. I think this was a test to see if Larry could teach Al Perez how to show some honest-to-God personality on camera. Spoiler, he failed. Wrestling was fine, although unspectacular. Ricky took the bulk of the match for his team, but the heels eventually took control and worked over Angel once he tagged in. They are still making reference to the Western States Heritage Championship. This is officially the regional belt of the 80s that was simultaneously around for months and was constantly referenced on TV, yet nobody ever gave 2 fucks about it. Not the fans, not the boys, not management. So why they continue to recognize it on TV, I will never know. The Alabama Junior Heavyweight title never got this much press. Ridiculous. So Perez hit Angel with a backbreaker airplane spin combo. And then he got the win with a spinning toe hold. Because apparently the spinning toe hold was more devastating than a move where you're picked up in the air, spun around, and then subsequently dropped on your back and neck. But he had to get his shit in, you see. And that then led to their post-match promo where Gary Hart proceeded to have a conversation about reinstating the pile driver. What? Now, of course, that wasn't the only thing he talked about. He also did a heat promo on Nikita Koloff and Dusty Rhodes, vowing that if his men hit their finishers on the superpowers, It would be the end of their careers as we know it, which is kind of amusing. If Al Perez slaps on that spinning toe hold, God damn it all, that's it. That is a career-ending move. The devastating spinning toe hold of doom. And, this is funny. He told his boys, let's take home the $1 million. But of course, I still get 30% of the payout. That was a good line. Because of course, the Weasley heel manager would still want his fair split. And that took us to the returning Dr. Death Steve Williams versus Alan Martin. Steve made his return to the Clash of Champions in a not-so-great interview. He was off TV for a while. I think pretty much since the fallout from Starrcade, he'd been away. But he was back here to pick apart and overpower some job geeks. Threw Martin around for a while. Press slammed him all over the place. Turned him inside out with clotheslines and shoulder tackles. And he eventually went over with the Oklahoma Stampede. Meanwhile, JR spent the whole time marking out for him on commentary. No shame in that. And we all know about the friendship between Jim and Dr. Death. You knew he was going to put him over as much as he could. I know they eventually get Steve involved in all the Varsity Club stuff. If I remember right, I think he stays babyface for a while longer. They eventually flip him and align him with Kevin Sullivan, but I don't think that's till a bit later on. In any case, we have now come to our decision-making time on what management is going to do with Dusty. Following the altercation with Jim Crockett a couple weeks ago, it was a meeting they held in Atlanta with all the board executives. In addition to them, we also had J.J. Dillon present. He informed us that he wanted to be a part of this ever so important decision-making process, just to ensure that fair justice was done. And this was so fucking incredible. The way they pieced together all this footage. There were more camera cuts in this 2-minute pre-tape than I think I saw during the entire run of Vince McMahon's production in WWE. One camera cut after another. Just trying to film everybody's reaction once the decision was made to suspend Dusty for 120 days. You get JJ smiling. Then there's a close-up of Dusty's hands folded on the table. Then they cut to Rob Garner, the spokesman. Then they cut to Dusty's face in a close-up. Then they cut to David Crockett, who looks on in disgust. Then they cut to Paul Bosch, who does some of the most hideous acting I think I've ever seen, where he shakes his head in absolute repulsion. It's like bam, 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 one camera shot after another. Rapid-fire shots to Dusty, to Rob, to Dusty, back to Rob, to David Crockett, to Paul Bosch, back to Rob, back to Dusty. I was getting motion sick. Anybody that ever gave WWE shit about rapid-fire camera cuts, I don't want to hear it. After watching this editing catastrophe, they were having way too much fun in the production truck. But, what else happened here? Well, they stripped Dusty of the U.S. title. That was pretty apparent it would happen. And Dusty got a chance to say his piece. He looked JJ in the eyes from across the table and said he won't be held responsible for anything that transpires in the next 120 days. He says this as they continue to do more rapid-fire camera cuts to film JJ's facial reactions, sitting there listening to Dusty's rant. And the big takeaway here was Tony Schiavone getting some perspective from Paul Bosch and Jim Crockett following the vote. And they made it clear that they did not vote to have Dusty suspended, but it was a collective vote, and the board has spoken, so their hands are tied. And Dusty had no further comment. He just sort of blew Tony off. And that is where we stand with the voting decision on Dusty's status with the NWA. 120 days. He will be out of commission. Or will he be? No. You know the Horsemen are going to have a field day with that. Tell you who's not having a field day with that decision is the Road Warriors. Now, they're obviously pissed off. Animal was here with Paul Ellering, saying he thinks the decision stinks. But they have Dusty's back anytime. They've traveled up and down the road together. Never stabbed the other in the back. Put an asterisk next to that comment. And then here's where things got spicy. Paul Ellering brings up something about the Midnight Rider. And I wasn't really paying attention to the details here, but the Midnight Rider comment is very important. Don't overlook it. And for the record, anybody wondering where Hawk was in all this? My suspicion would be writing poetry. And that took us back to the ring for another returning face on the Superstation. It's the same guy, same name, with an entirely different look. Nikita Koloff versus Ryan Wagner. And again, just to repaint the picture of where Nikita was at this point in his career, he came back at the Clash after going away for a while to take care of his sick wife. He grew his hair out, lost a shit ton of weight. He still wrestled like Nikita. Still showed a lot of fire like the old Nikita did. But you could tell he was a changed man. JR actually flat out said here, Nikita was bigger and stronger than ever before. A flat out lie. But like I said, man, it was still a Nikita Koloff match. He won with the Russian sickle, beat the guy into powder. I mean, he obviously still had some passion for the business by this point. But even that was waning more and more as the year went along. I always have to remind myself, when you see Nikita with hair, it's kind of when you know it's all downhill for his career. He went from the Russian Nightmare to a generic white guy with a crew cut. And again, the amazing thing, he could still cut a promo. He could still do the Nikita Koloff interview. He talked about how the Crockett Cup is out of the picture for him now because Dusty's been suspended. He lets us know that he feels so much good. Apparently he was channeling from the Great Khali Book of Translation. Or maybe it was vice versa. Maybe Khali was catching up on his old Nikita tapes. For those that don't know, go watch last week's Retro NXT review. But even though Nikita is feeling so much good, he's not feeling good about Dusty being suspended for 120 days and not being able to wrestle in the Crockett Cup. But he still wants competition in the NWA. He's going to find a way to stay active and stay hungry. And his final warning message goes out to Gary Hart. He can talk all the trash he wants about the superpowers, but eventually he's going to eat those words. Again, it's a great promo. He's still got the edge. But boy, howdy, does that shit go south before not too long. So that took us to this oddly comedic interview with Barry Windham and Lex Luger. First thing out of Luger's mouth, he grabs the microphone from Tony and goes, "I've been noticing that I've hogged the spotlight lately. Haven't really given Barry a proper chance to speak his mind. So I'm going to kick back and wait my turn to speak. And I'm going to give Barry the platform to share anything he has on his mind." At which point, as soon as Tony tries to pass the mic over to Barry, what should Luger do but immediately interrupt him to try to finish his train of thought? So it all makes sense. This is why Barry fucked over Luger and turned heel. He was sick of this asshat hogging the spotlight and interrupting his promo time. Yeah. Luger got what he deserved. I did like, too, the fact that Luger addressed the fact that he has a reputation for taking off his shirt and flexing for the camera too much. Of course, nothing ever changed there. I mean, he was still doing that shit years later. But, I mean, the point was Barry getting to talk about Dusty's suspension, basically letting us know that management made the wrong decision because they're basically taking away Dusty's ability to make a living and provide for his family. And, you know, Barry's got a point. God damn it. How's Cody supposed to finish his story if he can't eat? These NWA board directors in their corporate suits trying to stop a man from winning a world championship and taking down the bloodline 30-some years later. What a bunch of animals. This is history they're fucking with. So, yeah, Barry's promo sucked. And then Luger talked for about an hour and put over the excitement of the '88 Crockett Cup. Doesn't matter that they're ranked number 6 overall. They've got the straps to prove they're the best. And just to make sure that people know that Luger and Windham are the best, Luger can't help himself. He's way too horny right now for words. He's got to take off that shirt. And he's got to flex for the crowd. Got to give the ladies what they paid for. Real talk for a minute. This is probably the greatest Lex Luger promo in history. This is better than that interview he did on that independent show years ago where he forgot his lines and tried to walk into a locker room without recognizing that the door was locked from the other side. He was just ranting up a storm. This was like peak comedy Luger. This was gives no fucks, don't care Lex Luger. The best kind of Luger promo you could get. Where he just stops caring and quits trying to be so serious. He was always awesome in that role. Luger was actually a very funny guy if you think about it. If you don't believe me, go watch some of those old Nitro promos he did during the late 90s and early 2000s when the company was in total shambles. Luger was just out there being a jackass every week and not caring. He was so great. Now, he was still too reserved around this period. He had not quite fully come out of his shell yet. So following all that, we had our very first vignette for the upcoming debut of the Midnight Rider, who absolutely was not Dusty Rhodes under a hood. As you could clearly tell by the tonal inflection, it did not in any way sound like Dusty Rhodes. Not even remotely close. So, well, yeah. The Midnight Rider is coming to Crockett Promotions on behalf of Dusty and Magnum. if you were able to even catch anything from the barely audible pre-tape around the campfire. I mean, it was borderline impossible to hear any of the dialogue. The canned Western music was just drowning out the audio. But again, Precious Paul alluded to it earlier when he brought up the Midnight Rider. We did not have to wait too long. Absolutely not Dusty working us. Don't get it twisted. This is the real deal. Just like it was the real deal when the James Gang wrestled the Midnight Express in 1986. And it totally wasn't Magnum TA and Dusty Rhodes under hoods. And yet James E. Cornette had the gall to claim it was Dusty and Magnum the whole time. He was the one that got worked, brother. So anyway, as we continue to be on the lookout for the Midnight Rider, we go back to the ring for Tully and Arn versus Kendall Windham and Mike Jackson. I still forget that Kendall Windham is wrestling right now. God, that guy was so lucky he was above 6 feet. I mean, he had less of a physique in 1988 than Adam Cole does in 2024. It's amazing they actually let that guy wrestle on TV with that physical conditioning. From what I remember, too, I think he actually bulks up years later. After being around the business for nearly 10 years, he woke up one day and said, I'm going to work out today. I'm going to get a gym membership. Try to put on some muscle mass. God, he was so skinny here. But this is splendid. Kendall's doing some stuff with Tully and Arn. Basic chain wrestling. Nothing extraordinary. Then Mike Jackson tags in. Immediately eats an implant DDT from Arn for the pin. Just killed the guy flat. I was like, really? That's how low on the totem pole Mike Jackson is in 1988? He can't even go toe-to-toe with Double A for a minute? You just had to beat him flat in 10 seconds? It's amazing stuff. Then we had the Horseman promo afterwards. And as you can probably imagine, after seeing that Midnight Rider clip minutes ago, well, the heels are not happy about this. JJ's going off on the grave miscarriage of justice that's being done. He knows Dusty Rhodes inside and out. And there's no way any rational man can look at that pre-tape and not be able to easily figure out that it's Dusty. To which Jim Ross retorts point blank, how do you know? And this did not help JJ maintain his composure. He takes off his prescription glasses and goes, because I paid a good fortune for these glasses, and I know a Dusty sighting when I see one. So, well, yes, we are indeed going right back to the story of 1986 with Dusty and Magnum dressing up as the James Gang on TV. And all the heels came out every week to insinuate that the James Gang was actually Dusty and Magnum the whole time. And all the babyfaces were playing dumb. Kept rubbing it in their faces like, prove it, motherfucker. Which is actually a very clever strategy. I mean, it's what Midsouth did with Stagger Lee all those weeks. Everybody knew what was going on, including the announcers. But they would never give the heels an opportunity to get the better of them. So they'd tell them to take off the mask, and if they're so sure it's not Stagger Lee, if it's actually Junkyard Dog under the hood, prove it. Great segment. As was the next segment, if only for the graphic they printed for the next match. Here's what the description read. Sting versus Destroyer. Not Destroyer number 1 or Destroyer number 2. Not the Super Destroyer. No, just Destroyer. For all we know, he could have been a second cousin of the Super Destroyer. Wouldn't want to give away too much information, though. That might start hinting at his identity. So Sting killed him. Beat him in a minute with the Scorpion Deathlock. This Destroyer fellow looked oddly thin. Quite emaciated, in fact. If he was like 6 inches taller, I'd have assumed it was Kendall Windham under the hood. But he was way too short to be Kendall. What I really want to talk about is the post-match promo. Sting. My God. Sting. He was just... I mean, he was so horrible at the time. But, like, none of that ever mattered just because of how over he was. I can't even begin to describe what was happening here. He and Jim Ross are trying to rattle off like 100 different talking points. Sting has scrambled brains trying to come up with anything to say. They mentioned stuff about the Crockett Cup. Again, Sting is teaming with Ronnie Garvin for reasons that are never fully explained. Then they start talking about Dusty's suspension. Sting is fully on Dusty's side, saying he should have creamed Tully with that baseball bat even harder to put him in the hospital. And right as they go to wrap up, Sting just starts fucking with JR. He goes, "Any more questions, Jim?" JR goes, "Nah, I think you about covered it." And then for like the next 30 seconds, Sting just keeps talking over Jim. Jim's trying to wrap up the segment. Sting's just fucking howling in his face, loud as humanly possible. I have no idea what was going on here. And at the same time, you can tell they're methodically keeping the cameras to film it, or they're keeping the cameras on to film it. I guarantee you Dusty was laughing his ass off behind the curtain watching this. I've never seen a promo segment where somebody asks the interviewer any more questions, and then as the interviewer says, "No, I think we've covered everything, sir," the interviewee is still hanging around screaming into the microphone. Epic television. And then we had Ric Flair out at the booth after the break. And you'll be happy to know he was not popping pills this week. Unlike last week and whatever in the hell that segment was supposed to be. And, well, he really had nothing to say here. Aside from plugging the Crockett Cup, he promised that Dusty would be exposed as the Midnight Rider, and management would see it fit that he's gone from the NWA for breach of suspension. Meanwhile, Flair's going to continue to style and profile and defend his title until he decides to hang up the boots. He also promised he would continue to have sex with all the women around the country because he plans on living until he's 1,000 years old. Well, he may in fact achieve it. If there is one man capable of defying death itself multiple times over, it is Ric fucking Flair. I wouldn't be surprised if that guy lives until he's 5,000 years old. He'll be the next Gandalf. So then Ron Garvin wrestled Bob Emery. And Garvin won with a knockout punch in 30 seconds. Absolutely nothing else to say about it. And back at the booth, momentarily, we had Jim Crockett out so he could update us on the status of Dusty's suspension, indicating that it will officially take effect on April 16th at the Boston Gardens. He will fulfill all of his remaining contractual obligations for appearances until then, and afterwards the 120-day suspension will be in place. That also leaves Nikita up in the air, because he'll either have to pick a new partner to replace Dusty in the Crockett Cup, or he will have a second window of opportunity, which they informed us will be elaborated on next week. And, I'm not going to spoil what happens there. We'll save that discussion for next time. And this is awesome. Right as Jim Crockett's trying to wrap up his train of thought, you hear off in the distance Jim Cornette starts ranting and raving. Jim Crockett does not skip a beat. He sees Cornette coming. You have never seen a man bolt off camera so fast in his life. He pulled a Joe Biden trying to avoid the press here. He said, "Fuck you, I'm out." And he was gone. And that gave Cornette a few seconds to do his thing. He commented on the Dusty suspension. The recurring story of this entire show: everybody must acknowledge that Dusty is suspended, or you will be heavily fined. And then he cut the heel promo on the Fantastics, saying that the Midnights would love to whip all their fans and all the family members, but since they don't have time to strap every last fan, they're going to make quick work of Bobby and Tommy instead. I like how Corny inadvertently recognized that the Fantastics have a lot of fans. Should have said, "We'd whip all your fans, Fantastics." But the problem is those whippings would be over in a matter of seconds, because nobody likes you bums anyway. Come on, Jim. Should have been on your feet there. And that finally brought us to the Varsity Club versus El Negro and Tony Bowen. Funny, I actually knew an Anthony Bowen growing up in school. No way this was the same guy. I mean, the Bowen I knew was actually in good physical shape. And he was a good athlete. This Tony Bowen looked like he's never even sniffed the inside of a gym before. So, well, here's what happened. I looked away from the screen for about 15 seconds to type the names of the people involved in the match. I looked up. I saw Rotunda doing a few amateur moves. And then about 5 seconds later, the bell rings. And Kevin Sullivan had already left the ring to go toward the podium. I have no idea how the match ended. The only thing we saw in the replay was Rotunda hitting a butterfly suplex on one of the job guys. But I know it was Sullivan that got the pin. So whatever happened in this blink and you miss it squash, it was very abrupt and very unmemorable. I honestly didn't even realize Sullivan was part of the match until the very end. I just kind of assumed it was Rick Steiner and Mike Rotunda teaming. Like I said, I was very pressed for time trying to watch this episode. I also didn't really jot much down about their promo afterwards. Basically, the premise here was Sullivan informing everybody that the Midnight Rider situation is a lot darker than people are giving it credit for. This Midnight Rider has a reputation in places like Florida for ending people's careers, including top names like Kendo Nagasaki, who we know is the Black Ninja from Midsouth. He also mentioned Mordecai. Wasn't that a failed WWF gimmick once upon a time? Yeah, I don't know. Basically, he told us all the heels in the NWA should join forces, because apparently it's going to take 12 top bad guys to take out one babyface. So the Midnight Rider is presumably a Power Ranger. Well, at least we went out strong this week. It's been a long time since we've seen Captain Redneck on this show. but he's back, baby. And he's teaming with the Powers of Pain to wrestle Larry Davis, Tony Suber, and the Italian Stallion. I'd have preferred just seeing Dick Murdoch wrestle these three guys in a handicap match. That way I could see more of Dick Murdoch and less of the other two. For the entire 20 seconds it went, it was fun. I did enjoy him watching valiantly struggle but still succeed to elevate the fat fuck Larry Davis. Killed him with a brainbuster. It's funny too, you watch it in slow-mo on replay, you see right as Davis goes up, Murdoch starts to lose his grip on the guy's singlet. But he still managed to muscle that fat fucker up and drop him straight down. Probably blew himself up as a result, but he got the job done. And then we had the Army over at the interview booth for a quick little show closing promo. They only had a couple minutes, but Paul Jones basically let everybody know that Ivan Koloff and Dick Murdoch are going to be partners in the Crockett Cup. Basically gives the Army double the chance of winning the $1 million. Those two plus the Powers of Pain, both of whom are in the top 10 seed. And they gave Murdoch a chance to chime in here. After nearly giving himself a stroke, screaming about how awesome it would be to have $1 million, he then dials up the seriousness and tells everybody that nobody in this sport knows Dusty better than Captain Redneck. So if this Midnight Rider thinks he's fooling anybody in the Army, now he's got another thing coming. Tells Paul Jones to watch his back. Also vowing that he's got his fighter boots on. And if anybody's capable of stopping the Midnight Rider, it's Dickie. So, yeah, that was the show. A little shorter than usual. I mean, runtime for this one was only about an hour. Again, word better for me because I was already trying to cram in watching this show along with like a million other things last weekend. Overall, it was a considerably forgettable episode. I mean, really nothing of tremendous value to come out of it. Not a bad show, not a great show. Just sort of a simplistic middle-of-the-road program to generate a little bit of hype for the Crockett Cup, and that's about it. So we'll go ahead and move over to Midsouth now. And right out of the gate, the first thing my notes read here, can't neglect to mention this offhand. My God, what the fuck is Boyd Pierce's suit? All in caps, by the way. I have gone on record by saying that the brown suit look is never particularly appealing visually. Boyd took the brown suit look to a whole different level of vile. Looked like a giant baby threw up on him. Everything from the suit jacket to the shirt to the pants to the fucking tie. It was a brownish, orangish tint with what appeared to be either shit or piss stains in various places. And we've seen some fairly outrageous Boyd Pierce suits in the last several months. This one had to make the Hall of Fame for all-time worst suit designs. I'm still amazed Bill Watts made it through these tapings without laughing. So, last week, we really dived into the fine details of the North American Heavyweight Title Tournament they hosted in New Orleans. This was the one-night tournament held on the 21st of March after Stagger Lee had vacated the belt. And the big centerpiece to everything here was Mr. Olympia's involvement. Not only have we facilitated his heel turn and proved that he was solely responsible for everything that has been happening to wrestling too, but he also made it to the finals of the tournament to wrestle JYD. And after establishing that him and Skandar Akbar are now in a working agreement, We saw the giant schmoz take place in the tournament final. We got interference from Kendo Nagasaki. Skandar Akbar had been yanked into the ring. There was all the chaos that led up to the dog basically being knocked unconscious due to a thrust kick from Kendo. Had a pair of ref bumps. And when Olympia went to cover dog for the pin, the dog had actually been down on his stomach, so it never should have counted as a fall. And as a result, the belt is being held up again, which Akbar and Olympia did not know of prior to their locker room interview they did, where Olympia went into detail and explained everything about the Wrestling 2 situation, him feeling disrespected for taking the spot of 2 in that Loser Leaves Mid-South tag match, never receiving anything in return, not even a simple thank you, and obviously I'm glossing over some smaller things in between. If you want to hear my full recap of the tournament, you can go listen to last week's Mid-South recap where we broke down all the key moments and touched on the finer detail. I mean, the first 12 minutes of this week's show was mostly just recapping everything we touched on last week. But it was a good lead into the Mr. Olympia Tim Horner match that opened this week's show. Really, the first match we're seeing Mr. Olympia work as a heel in the Irish McNeil Boys Club. And obviously, he was not out here with the North American Heavyweight title. But he did have Akbar at ringside. I also believe this is our first look at Pee Wee Anderson in Mid-South as a referee. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, all you Mid-South fanatics out there. I don't believe we've seen Pee Wee Randy Anderson prior to this week. And he'll be around the area for a while longer before jumping to Crockett Promotions later on in 85, I believe. Simple little showcase squash for Olympia. Horner got a brief little flurry at the end, but he was quickly shut down and put away with a sleeper hold. And then it was back to more recap footage, this time regarding the business with Hacksaw Duggan and the Rat Pack. Funny how this works. We go from seeing footage of a top babyface now gone heel, flipping it on its face in the next segment. We now have a top heel going face. It's almost like this shit was well thought out in advance. But it's another pivotal moment in the Rat Pack timeline. For months now, we've seen Duggan's popularity in Mid-South take off. He's started to gain a lot more traction. People are liking him. And he's doing a lot more stuff on his own. Separate business from what DiBiase and Bourne were doing on TV. And there was that pre-tape a while back where Duggan kept implying that the Rat Pack shouldn't be doing business with foreign adversaries, obviously drawing attention to Skandar Akbar and Kamala. And DiBiase didn't necessarily deny that they were in cahoots. So there were some shady business dealings going on there, and Duggan wasn't aware of it at the time. At some point, you had to figure things would blow up. The egos were just too big. So it all culminated a few weeks back during a tag match where Duggan and Bourne were going up against Wrestling 2 and Tiger Conway Jr. And the spot at the end was Bourne restraining Conway so Duggan could tackle him with a spear. But a little miscue redirected Duggan into his own partner. And we actually caught that exclusive footage during the commercial break where Duggan and Bourne got into a fight. And Ted DiBiase was not on that show, so he was not there to intervene. But there they basically established Duggan's split from the Rat Pack. He's going his own way now. And of course, that's only part of the story. We have not heard Ted's input on the matter yet. What he thinks of all of this. Then we had the Super Destroyer versus the Junkyard Dog. And unlike that episode of Crockett we just reviewed, where Sting wrestled a plain old Destroyer, Here, I can at least confirm that it was the Super Destroyer, a.k.a. Scott Irwin under a mask. Didn't really know much about it. Simple showcase piece for Dog. I did like the inadvertent ref bump at one point where Alfred Neely tried to slide out of the way to avoid Destroyer barreling over him. But it basically ends up with Destroyer knocking Neely off the apron after Dog hit him with an arm drag. So you just see Neely go flying off screen for a few seconds before trying to casually get back in the ring. You just think, of all the times we see ref bumps that look so choreographed in wrestling, the one time they actually do a ref bump that was totally unplanned. Of course, they don't take advantage of it. It actually wasn't a complete one-sided squash either. Dog was doing a good bit of selling for Destroyer here. But as the story goes, once that thumper comes into play, it's all over about the shouting. It's one of the dumbest cliches I've ever heard. So stupid. And then following that, we had our second King Kong Bundy showcase. He had just arrived in the Mid-South area last week. And as we all know, the gimmick with Bundy is that he wants the referees to initiate 5 counts for all of his matches. He's confident that he can get the win via 3 count. But it's that extra 2 falls that sets him apart from all the other jabronis. And before the match, they aired a quick little pre-tape promo he did, where he basically reiterated his promo from the other week. He said the word punk about 5,000 times here. Said he didn't come to Mid-South to wrestle a bunch of punks. He came to wrestle the top of the food chain. Guys like Andre, Wrestling 2, JYD, Butch Reed. The list goes on. And even though Mid-South is making him prove his worth at the moment, the day's going to come where all those top guys are going to feel the brunt of Bundy's splash. And I can tell you who felt the brunt of Bundy's splash this week was John Davidson. And the first thing I wrote here as soon as I took one look at this fella, if Sami Zayn was like 5 or 6 inches taller, it's exactly what John Davidson looked like. A buggy whip arm, pale-looking scrub with no muscle tone. Horribly unkempt beard. If Sami ever contemplated the denim jumpsuit trouser look, he basically would have been a smaller version of John Davidson. It's ironic, too, because nowadays John Davidson would probably be one of the most over babyfaces to modern WWE fans. I mean, when you look like Sami Zayn does, doesn't matter. As long as you have charisma. For the record, no. John Davidson was not Sami Zayn in terms of showing charisma on camera. But it was lather, rinse, repeat like last week. Bundy beat him up, hit him with a big splash off the ropes, and he made poor Pee Wee Anderson count the 5 because he was not satisfied with 3. And this is where I also noted the giant size difference between Bundy and Pee Wee. 2 complete polar opposite body types. God, about 5 years ago, I had more of that Pee Wee Anderson frame. If I stood next to Bundy at the time, oh, trust me, I'd have counted that 5 faster than you could say count. Yes, sir. But so far, they're just kind of taking their time building up Bundy on TV. You know, they teased the obvious programs with some of the bigger name baby faces on the roster, but you could tell they're clearly not rushing into anything yet. And then we came back for Art Cruz and Ron Ellis versus Kamala and the Black Ninja. Again, really not much to say about it. I spend most of it laughing whenever Kamala would tag out the kendo. You have Akbar and Friday on the floor having to signal for Kamala to grab the tag rope. just because of the fact that in kayfabe he wasn't really accustomed to doing tag matches. So he really didn't understand how the rules worked. Now, they actually did some of that stuff with him in World Class, too, when he was there. Like, he'd be pacing around on the apron, illegally going in and out of the ring to get involved in the match. It's like, I mean, how do you control a monster like Kamala? There's no way anybody was holding him back. So that stuff was always enjoyable. Again, pretty blink and you miss it short. Kamala got the win with the running splash on Cruz. I don't remember a single thing the Black Ninja did. My guess would be hitting a shit ton of chops and thrust kicks. Because that's kind of what Kendo Nagasaki does in terms of offense. And it was still like 90% more than what Kamala ever did. Kamala's offense was more lumbering, big blows, and sometimes a belly tap or two. And then with our remaining airtime, Hacksaw Reed wrestled Kelly Kiniski. It was about as harmless as you could get for a 45-second Kelly Kiniski squash. It wasn't long enough to be either boring or outright horrendous. Now, Reed's obviously relatively green by this point still. He did very well with picking dudes up and slamming them down. Some of the basics weren't entirely crisp. But you could even see some of the early stuff he was doing in '83. He showed a lot of promise from right out of the gate. I mean, it was only a matter of time before Watts saw that and wanted to take advantage of it. But again, kind of followed the pattern like a lot of TV squashes this week. Very short. But they highlighted what they needed to and didn't let it overstay its welcome. You know, overall, kind of a relatively uneventful episode. I mean, when you take into account the first 20 minutes was mostly recap footage, the rest of the program was just showcase squash material. And again, never a bad thing. You know, they're getting over characters, getting over personalities. Just not really a whole lot to discuss in terms of talking points. But again, you're seeing a lot of new names crop up. And, guys like King Kong Bundy and Hacksaw Reed new to the scene. We've got some flip-flopping and character dynamics with guys like Duggan and Mr. Olympia. So they're definitely freshening up the main event picture. I mean, just in a matter of months, got a very different class of roster members. And that'll continue to grow and grow from here on out. Now, it'll be really exciting to see how this all unfolds as we move toward the summer and even the fall season of '83. And then eventually get into my favorite calendar year in Midsouth, 1984. And all the fun times ahead. But as we switch gears with World Class, I mean, they're trying. They are seriously trying. As boring and lifeless as a lot of these shows are, sprinkle in the occasional good promo and angle here and there. I mean, that really is where we're at with World Class Championship Wrestling in '85. They're just very bland, safe wrestling shows with a moderately decent budget for the time. It's like if World Class and Mid-South could just combine their production and booking, you get the best wrestling product of all time. You know, and again, they're really trying to push the Texas Stadium card. It is one of the bigger shows that World Class ran throughout the year, if you discount the Thanksgiving and Christmas Star Wars. They've been plugging stuff sporadically, but I mean, even the weekly episodic build is just, again, it's very bland and very safe. They're not taking a whole lot of risks. They're not pushing the boundaries of heavy heat angles or big momentous occurrences that really get you salivating to see more. They're just paint-by-numbers wrestling shows. Like, I even take a look at how they opened the card this week. Terry Daniels versus Scott Casey. Nothing against Scott Casey. But when I saw that name pop up on screen, first of all, I had no memory Scott Casey ever wrestled in Dallas. Second of all, didn't he retire in like the late 80s or the early 90s? How old was he in 1985? Had to be in his early 40s, right? I mean, that guy was wrestling back in the early 70s. So it's like, okay, great. Scott Casey's here. What does any of this have to do with Texas Stadium or any of the ongoing feuds at the moment? It was just a showcase match to put Casey over. It also didn't help that the match went for a fucking hour and a half. Just kept going and going and going. I mean, at one point I looked up at the timeline and saw where that next break spot was coming. I think it got progressively farther away. I'm not entirely positive this wasn't sanctioned to be a 60-minute Iron Man match. Felt like one. I do still like the singular Dallas fan in attendance that would periodically try to start a boring chant. I think that same fan was on last week's taping block. Tried to do that on several occasions. I'm not disagreeing here. I mean, at one point they put the camera out to show the audience. A lot of them had that mouth-breathing, dazed look on their face. They were either asleep with their eyes open or they were outright cardboard cutouts of human bodies. No emotion, no excitement, no movement. Just sitting on their hands watching. And after a bunch of plotting back and forth action, Casey hit Daniels with a, quote, botched, I think, backbreaker over the knee. No idea. He either lost Daniels on the way down or just didn't know how to properly execute a backbreaker. Overall, I think the match went like 9 minutes. May as well have been 9 hours. Just a nothing happening match in the middle of a show that, I mean, really should be aimed to focus on Texas Stadium and regulate interest for those feuds. And the next match was at least closer to accomplishing said goal of hype. At least both these guys are advertised for Texas Stadium. It's Hercules Hernandez versus Gentleman Christopher Adams. Sort of an interesting pairing. They definitely worked the big man, little man dynamic early on. But Adams was able to eventually get some heat on Hernandez in moderation. Watching Hercules Hernandez work, man, I mean, it's crazy because, I mean, the guy was around for years, and he worked in both major wrestling organizations throughout the 80s and early 90s. I mean, he was greener than a pepper tree, as the old JC truism goes. But he had charisma. This offense always looked like dog shit. But that guy can make you believe in everything he was doing. He had so much intensity behind everything he did. And it really covered up for the fact that his strikes and punches looked awful. It also helps that he could lift dudes up and throw them around like sacks of potatoes. People always love that stuff. But when Adams went up top, Sunshine shook the rope so Adams would lose his balance. Took a hell of a bump for it. And I thought he blew out his knee when he landed on the mat. God, that looked brutal. And right as Hercules tried to take advantage, Gino Hernandez hit the ring and started attacking him with his dress shoe. Then Sunshine ran in and tried to spray her gimmick toward the heels to blind him. but they powdered and ran off through the crowd. I liked how Sunshine just ran blatant interference right in front of David Manning. Didn't even bat an eyelash at it. Sunshine just crushed Adams on the top rope. David didn't even admonish her. Just turned the cheek. Looked the other way, pretending not to see it. Can you say biased official? But again, this all obviously ties in with Chris Adams and Gino Hernandez being part of that big multi-person tag match they're doing. I think they mentioned last time they have some open contract to wrestle another tag team on that show. I would presume Hercules would be part of that match. Who his partner will end up being, I have no idea. That's still up in the air. I'm honestly not even sure they knew who it was going to be at this point. And that took us to a match next that I am not making up. It is Kevin Von Erich versus Thor. Actually, haven't we seen Thor wrestle in Dallas? I think I made a joke about that last time we saw him. The only period in history where Thor was a blatant job guy. And it's funny, too, because he had a good body, good size, good physique, great hair. I mean, you take this same matchup and put it in a WWF ring, who do you think was going over there? Thankfully, this was Dallas, so the ending was never really in question. They kind of had the David Goliath thing going on where Kevin was using the quickness and the endurance to work around Thor's power game. But once that claw slapped on, you could call it. I mean, really not much to say about it. I did laugh at Bill Mercer's attempts to give Thor some credibility by reminding us Thor was the most powerful of all the Greek gods. Well, not here. This Thor was both weak and inferior. But he had good hair. Got to point that out. Prior to the main event, we had a quick little Sunshine interview where she let everybody know that Hercules Hernandez cannot fight two grown men on his own. So she's going to dig up another newcomer to the Dallas area and give Hercules a partner so that they can take on Gino and Chris as a unit. So in other words, Sunshine basically just flat out buried Hercules' ability to handle business on his own. Even though the sole purpose for bringing him in was that so he could combat the heels. Now Sunshine realizes, wait a second. There's too many of them. I need reinforcement. One babyface can't take on 7 heels. What was I thinking? Well, maybe should have contemplated that first. Oh, by the way, that took me about 6 seconds to recap. God loves Sunshine. She was an amazing talent. Not the best promo in the world. She had that Dave Meltzerism going on here where she kept saying, you know, over and over again. To the point where I actually responded at one point by saying, no, Sunshine, I don't know. You can stop bringing it up. I also liked at the very end, Bill Mercer goes, Sunshine, what's in the spray can? Perfectly valid question. And then Sunshine just looks at Bill and smiles. It's either tear gas or toxic formaldehyde. Either way, it's cute that Sunshine wants to keep that information concealed. Probably doesn't want the government knocking on her door asking questions. They're just highly toxic chemicals, Bill. No need to be pushy. But then, the main event. A never-before-seen Dallas main event that revolutionized the industry. A completely new, fresh matchup that we have never seen 8,734 times in the past. The Fantastics versus the Midnight Express. I know. Brand new idea. Never seen these teams wrestle before. If only we knew what kind of chemistry they had. So for those that can't pick up on overdramatic sarcasm, yes, we're doing this match yet again. It's literally every fucking Midnight's Fantastics match we've ever recapped. And they've already blown through this program in Dallas faster than a hiccup. And these two teams have only really been around the territory for 3 months. If the Midnights haven't been wrestling completely random TV matches with underneath guys, they're stuck wrestling Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers. Can never do Ian and Condrey against Kevin and Kerry, or Mike and Kerry, or Mike and Kevin. But we'll do Fantastics and Midnights until we're blue in the fucking face, brother. Like, I mean, I don't even mean to come off as condescending in my approach here, but how many different ways can I put over what's essentially the same two teams wrestling for the umpteenth thousandth time? It's a great match every time they do it. But it's nothing new. We've seen it. They've beaten this horse to death. The wrestling's great. The action's hot. People are into everything. I just don't know how else to review the same match by this point. You know, the centerpiece here is that the American tag titles are still currently vacated. So this was in part a sanctioned title match to attempt to crown new champions. Of course, they weren't actually going to blow it off here. Because right when things broke down, Bobby Eaton went over and kneed Rick Hazard in the back, which led to Jim Cornette hitting the ring to whack Fulton with a tennis racket. And while that only got a 2 count, because of course it did, had to kill the racket gimmick in Dallas 3 months after the new heel team arrives. But out runs David Manning to chase off Corny. And there's a bunch of other shit that happens off camera that we don't even see. I think Eaton and Rogers fought over the top rope out to the floor. By then the bell sounded and the match was completely thrown out. Technically the Fantastics win as a result of a disqualification. But the belts are still held up as a result because no pinfall was counted. So you see they're obviously carrying that over into Texas Stadium in May. Which means that yes, we will be seeing those guys go at it yet again. I don't know. I mean, I love both these teams. It's just, I think I kind of talked about it at the top of the show. The law of diminishing return. When you book the same set of guys to go at it over and over again, there's going to be a burnout factor there. Especially when they're done in such close proximity. I think you spread the matches out over a few months. Cool. That's fine. Because then the people are actually clamoring to see them touch again in the future. The problem with this Dallas program is that the matches are so frequent and they're so repeated. It's just overkill now. And all the time, I mean, you're waiting for that eventual moment where the Midnights finally split off and do the program with the Von Erichs. mean, the story kind of writes itself on paper, but it never happens. I'm just kind of over the feud now. I mean, we're already talking about this exact same program in Crockett Promotions a few years later. If you weren't already sick of it in 1985, well, you get to revisit it 3 years later. God. All those years people bitched about the John Cena-Randy Orton feud. And the 500-something matches those guys had. That's nothing compared to this. At least those matches had stipulations in place every now and then. And overall, another episode of World Class that kind of finds its way into the archives and doesn't do much to move the needle. And again, that's more of a fatigue factor than anything, but after seeing that Dallas formula so many times, I don't know, man. I mean, it's clear they really don't have much of a grand vision at this point. They latched onto that Von Erich Freebird feud for so long. When the day finally came where the Freebirds were no longer a working unit in Dallas, it's clear they're creatively stifled. They have no fresh ideas. I mean, they're just trying to take who they have on the roster and figure out the best heel-face combinations. Some of them are okay. Others have been utter flops. And a lot of these ideas haven't registered anything past 2 or 3 months. You get a constant rotation of names, but that's about it. It's not even the sizzle without the steak. Because the steak isn't even all that great to begin with here. And again, with them only being a month out from the stadium show, you would expect the hype factor to be so much more on point than it is right now. So, that's kind of where we are in the Classic Archives timeline. But as we go to wrap things up for this one, stay posted for Monday, because again, I'm still not really sure what I'm going to do there. We'll have Retro Raw and Retro NXT to talk about, but I don't know. SmackDown is... It is indeed a show that exists right now. The question is, do I really want to devote more time and energy to watching a show that I mainly skip over half the time? I mean, what is there to really be looking forward to right now with post-Mania? The Bloodline stuff, I presume, is pretty much wrapped up for the time being. I think Cody's mainly going to be staying on Raw, so what do they got on SmackDown? A whole lot of nothing? That's what it's looking like right about now. But, I don't know. Maybe I'll catch the highlights and see if there's anything worth talking about. But for the Monday show, do not expect much, aside from the retro shows. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And I will catch you guys all on Monday's podcast. Thanks, take care, and peace out.